In the Bible, the name of her husband is recorded. The names of her 3 sons are recorded. Even the names of their wives are written down. But her name is never mentioned, not a single word. And yet she witnessed something no human had ever seen before. She lived in a world that had become so violent, so corrupt, that God himself regretted creating humanity. She stood beside a man the entire world called insane, as he spent decades building a massive ship in the middle of dry land. She helped gather supplies, prepared food, brought animals aboard, and sealed herself inside that vessel. While outside, the voices of every living person were swallowed by the rising waters. And when it was all over, when the flood finally receded, she stepped onto an empty world and faced something that may have been even harder than surviving the flood itself. She had to help rebuild civilization from nothing. And for all of this, the Bible doesn't even give her a name. So who was she? Why have Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions argued for centuries about what to call her? And what can her silence in Scripture teach us about the role of women in the most catastrophic event in biblical history? To answer that, we have to go back to the very beginning, before Noah, before the ark, before the rain. The book of Genesis paints a picture of early humanity that begins with hope and quickly collapses into darkness. After Adam and Eve left the garden, their descendants spread across the earth. People built, created, invented. Tubal-Cain worked with metal. Jubal created music. Civilization was forming. But alongside progress, something dark was growing. Genesis chapter 6 opens with one of the most mysterious passages in the entire Bible. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves. Scholars have debated this verse for thousands of years. Some believe it refers to fallen angels crossing a forbidden boundary. Others see it as the mixing of the descendants of Seth with the descendants of Cain, the blurring of the line between those who followed God and those who didn't. But regardless of the interpretation, the result was the same. Humanity became completely corrupted. Violence filled the earth, and Genesis describes a terrifying reality. Every thought of the human heart was evil all the time. This wasn't just a broken society, it was total moral collapse. And then comes one of the most devastating lines ever written. The Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. The God who once called creation good now looked at what humanity had become and felt deep sorrow, the kind of sorrow that carries pain, loss, and heartbreak. The decision was made. Judgment would come. Everything would be wiped out. Everything except one family. But why Noah? And even more importantly, why her? In a world where every human heart was filled with evil all the time, she somehow managed to preserve her family. And that was not a passive achievement. It was one of the greatest acts of faithfulness in the entire Bible. And yet the text never tells us her name. So how did the ancient world refer to her? This is where things start to get truly interesting. The most common tradition in Jewish rabbinic literature gives Noah's wife the name Naamah. She is mentioned in Genesis 4:22 as the daughter of Lamech, a descendant of Cain and the sister of Tubal-Cain, the first metalworker. Rabbis in early interpretations identified this Naamah as the woman who married Noah. But this idea is both compelling and controversial. If Naamah truly came from the line of Cain, it would mean that Noah's wife came from a cursed lineage, a line that built cities but drifted away from God, a line that produced the first murderer. Some scholars see beauty in this, a union between the righteous line of Seth and the gifted but fallen line of Cain, suggesting that the new humanity after the flood would carry both faith and creativity, devotion and innovation. But others find this troubling. If the mixing of righteous and unrighteous lines was part of what corrupted the world in Genesis 6, why would God allow Noah to marry into that very lineage? Rabbinic tradition offers an answer. They said Naamah was called pleasant because her actions were pleasing. Unlike the rest of her family, she chose a different path. She became proof that origin does not determine destiny. But this was not the only tradition. Another ancient text, the Book of Jubilees, written around the 2nd century before Christ, gives Noah's wife a completely different name, Imzara. According to this account, she was not from the line of Cain at all. but from Noah's own extended family, making her his cousin. This fits a recurring biblical pattern where righteous men married within their family line to preserve faith, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this changes the entire theological picture. Instead of redemption through the merging of different lines, it becomes a story of preservation, of God protecting a faithful lineage. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in the caves of Qumran seem to support this idea, though the texts are fragmented. But the mystery doesn't end with Jewish tradition, because Islamic tradition offers a completely different and unexpected perspective. In the Quran, Noah, known as Nuh, remains a great prophet, but his wife is not portrayed as faithful. Instead, she is presented as someone who rejected the truth, becoming an example of disbelief, even while living alongside a prophet. According to some traditions, she never even boarded the ark and perished with the rest, sharing the fate of the unbelievers. And in the Quranic account, even one of Noah's own sons refused to enter and was swept away by the flood. This creates a completely different image of her. In the biblical narrative, she is silent but present. She is on the ark, she survives, and she becomes part of the rebirth of humanity. In the Islamic tradition, however, she becomes a warning. Even being married to a prophet does not guarantee faith. So who was she really? A quiet hero or a symbol of betrayal? The honest answer is that we are dealing with different religious traditions interpreting the same ancient story through different theological lenses. But the biblical text is clear about one thing. She was on the ark. She survived. No matter what her name was or what she endured, she was among the 8 people God chose to preserve. And this is where the part of the story begins that most people think they understand, but actually don't: the building of the ark. Because what Noah and his wife endured during those years may have been even harder than the flood itself. Imagine putting yourself in her place for a moment. Your husband comes home and tells you that God has spoken to him, that the entire world will be destroyed, that every living thing on land will die, and that only your family will be saved. But there is one condition: you have to build a ship. Not just any ship, something massive beyond imagination. The dimensions described in Genesis are enormous, far larger than anything known at the time. This was not a weekend project. According to tradition, it took over a century to complete. Decades of work, waiting, and uncertainty. And all of this in a world where, according to some interpretations, it had never even rained before. Imagine the mockery. People didn't just doubt, they laughed. They came from far away just to see the man building a ship on dry ground. They mocked him, ridiculed him, threw insults. Where is the water, Noah? You think God speaks to you? You think you're special? And the attacks didn't stop with him. They reached her too, maybe even more deeply, because the harshest words often come from those closest to you. Imagine her family pleading with her to come back, telling her to abandon this madness, to give her children a normal life. Imagine friends turning away, whispers spreading, isolation growing. And if Noah had certainty because he heard God's voice, what did she have? Perhaps nothing but trust. She didn't receive visions. She didn't hear commands. She simply chose to believe, day after day, year after year, while the entire world told her she was wrong. In Hebrew, there is a word, emunah. It is often translated as faith, but it means something deeper: endurance, steadiness, the refusal to move even when everything around you tells you to walk away. And that is the kind of faith she lived out. Not a moment of belief, but a lifetime of it. But here's the reality about faith stretched over decades. It doesn't stay strong all the time. There must have been nights alone in the dark, staring at the unfinished structure rising outside, when a thought crept in, a question she could not silence. What if my husband didn't hear the voice of God at all, but only his own fear? What if I've spent my entire life building a monument to his mistake? She didn't have prophetic certainty. She had the choice of a wife, and every single morning she chose to stay. But her life during those years was not only about faith. There was another responsibility placed on her shoulders, one the Bible never describes directly, yet one that must have consumed an enormous part of her strength. Her sons needed wives. Shem, Ham, and Japheth had to find women willing to marry into the most ridiculed family on earth. Think about what that meant. These were not desirable marriages. No respected family would want their daughter tied to Noah's household, a name that had become a joke. And yet 3 women said yes. Ancient traditions even preserved their names, as if to honor their courage, while the name of Noah's own wife remained unknown. But finding them was only the beginning. Imagine the conversations that had to happen before each marriage. At some point, either Noah or his wife had to sit down with each of these young women and explain the truth. Our family believes the world is about to be destroyed. We are building a ship. If you marry my son, you must be on that ship when the time comes. Everyone you know, your parents, your friends, your entire world, will not be coming with you. How many women heard that and walked away? How many agreed at first only to change their minds when the ridicule grew louder? How many families forbade their daughters from even considering it? The 3 who stayed were extraordinary, but they did not become that way on their own. Someone had to prepare them. Someone had to teach them how to store food, how to manage animals on an unimaginable scale, how to endure the loss of everything they had ever known. And in the ancient world, that role belonged to the mother-in-law. She was the one who welcomed new wives into the family and trained them for life ahead. Noah's wife did more than raise 3 sons. She found, tested, and prepared 3 daughters-in-law for the most extreme survival scenario in human history. 8 people entered the ark. She had shaped at least 6 of them, and she wasn't just preparing people. She was preparing the ark itself. Because someone had to think through the practical reality the Bible never describes. What did it actually take to survive? 8 people and an unimaginable number of animals. Food for all of them, not just for 40 days of rain, but for the entire duration, which according to Genesis lasted over a year. Someone had to calculate those supplies. Someone had to design storage, plan feeding systems, organize schedules. Ancient traditions even suggest that Noah and his family barely slept during that time, because different animals required care at different hours, some at night, some constantly. One delay could lead to disaster. That means everything inside the ark had to run with precision, and perhaps it was she who held that entire system together. Unseen, unrecognized, but absolutely essential for survival. Noah built the ark, but who made it livable inside? In the ancient world, the responsibility for managing the household, preparing food, and organizing daily survival fell primarily on women, and it was likely she who turned that massive wooden structure into a place where life could continue. And then, the day finally came. The day everyone knew was coming, but no one could truly prepare for. Genesis chapter 7 describes the moment of entering the ark, pairs of animals, provisions, Noah, his sons, their wives, and her. And then comes a line that takes your breath away. And the Lord shut him in. God himself closed the door. Not Noah, not his wife, not human hands, God. And in that moment, everything became final. Everyone they had ever known was now on the other side of a door that would never open again. On that side may have been her parents, her sister, her childhood friends, the very people who once begged her to come back. And the same was true for the 3 daughters-in-law. Their families were out there too. She had spent years preparing these young women for this moment, but no preparation can soften the sound of a door closing between you and everyone you've ever loved. The text doesn't tell us if she cried. It doesn't tell us if she touched the sealed wood and whispered goodbye. It simply says she was inside, and they were not. Then the flood began. Not just rain, the breaking of the deep, the opening of the heavens. The earth split from below, the sky poured from above. The ark, which had stood still for decades, groaned, lifted, moved. The animals stirred, and outside, the world ended. But the real story, her story, unfolded inside. 8 people trapped in a floating vessel, surrounded by darkness except for dim light, the constant sound of water, the overwhelming presence of animals, and one unbearable truth. Everyone else was gone. They were the last living humans, drifting above the graves of the entire world they once knew. And they had no guarantee of when, or if, they would ever see land again. Grief does not disappear just because you are busy. It finds you in the quiet moments, in the middle of the night while measuring food, while cleaning again and again, while lying awake listening to someone crying in the next corner. And this is where Noah's wife becomes more than a background figure. In the middle of exhaustion, grief, and uncertainty, she held everything together. She kept the feeding schedules. She made sure her sons and daughters-in-law didn't break under the pressure. She maintained order in a space filled with fear, chaos, and trauma. Not because a voice commanded her, not because an angel appeared, but because it had to be done, and she was the kind of person who does what must be done. Maybe there was a night, months into the flood, when the water stretched endlessly in every direction, when the silence outside became absolute, when she sat alone in the dark and felt like she might finally break. Maybe she prayed and heard nothing. Maybe she cried quietly so no one would hear. Maybe she just stared into nothing and let the emptiness pass through her. And then, the next morning she got up and fed the animals. This is not the kind of faith that makes headlines, not the kind that parts seas or calls down fire. This is the kind of faith that gets you out of bed when there is no reason left, except that someone has to. And without that kind of faith, nothing survives. And then, after months that felt like years, something finally changed. Genesis chapter 8 begins with words that echo through all of Scripture. And God remembered Noah. Not because he had forgotten, but because he now turned his active attention toward that small family drifting above the remains of the old world. A wind passed over the earth, the waters began to recede, and the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Then comes one of the most beautiful scenes in Genesis. Noah released a raven, but it found no place to land. Then he sent out a dove, and it returned. There was still no dry ground. 7 days later, he sent the dove again, and this time it came back with a fresh olive leaf in its beak. For over a year, they had seen nothing but water. No green, no life, no sign that the earth was healing. And now a single leaf carried a message. Life was returning. 7 days later, the dove was sent out once more. And this time, it did not come back. The world was ready. Then God spoke again. Go out from the ark, you and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Notice the words. Go out, not leave, as if God himself was waiting outside to receive them. And notice who is named Noah and his wife. She is mentioned separately, acknowledged alongside him. Whatever role she played inside the ark, God recognized her as part of this moment. They stepped onto a world that was empty. No cities, no roads, no other people. Just earth, sky, and a silence that must have felt overwhelming. Noah built an altar and offered sacrifices, and God made a promise. Never again would he destroy all living things as he had before. Then came the rainbow, a covenant placed in the sky, a reminder that the waters of destruction would never return. But survival was only half the story. Now came the harder part, the part almost no one talks about. 8 people stood on an empty planet. No homes, no neighbors, no markets, no stored seeds, no tools beyond what they had brought with them, no shelter except the ark, and it was never meant to be a permanent home. The first challenge was food. Their supplies were nearly gone, and after more than a year, they were already running low. Someone had to decide what land could be cultivated after being submerged. Someone had to figure out which plants would grow first and how to stretch what little remained until new life could take root. And most likely, that someone was her. Archaeological evidence from ancient Mesopotamia shows that food storage and distribution were primarily handled by women. She had already proven she could sustain 8 people and countless animals for over a year in a floating structure. Now she had to do it again, on land from nothing, with no margin for error. But the practical challenges were only part of it. The emotional weight may have been even heavier. Imagine those first weeks. Every morning they woke up to absolute silence. No distant voices, no sound of life beyond their small group. Just wind, water, and the creaking memory of the ark behind them. The 3 daughters-in-law had lost everything. Every face they had ever known, gone. Grief doesn't disappear. It comes in waves, in a smell that reminds you of home, in the way the light falls at dusk, just like it did before, in small, quiet moments that suddenly bring everything back. And she had to do something almost impossible. She had to make space for that grief, and at the same time, lead everyone forward. She could not allow them to sink into grief. There were animals to care for, shelters to build, water to find, survival to secure. But she also could not pretend the grief didn't exist, because buried grief turns into bitterness. And bitterness among 8 people, who were now the entire population of the earth, could destroy them faster than the flood ever could. Every single day she had to walk a fragile line between honoring what was lost and building what had to come next. Without guidance, without precedent, without anyone to show her how. And then there were the relationships. 8 people in total isolation, under constant pressure, with no escape, no distance, no privacy. Ever. Who decides where the first shelter is built? Who gets the best land for planting? When one of the daughters-in-law is exhausted or needs rest, who takes her place? When Shem and Ham disagree, whether to stay or move, who steps in to keep peace? Family dynamics are already complicated, but when your family is the entire human race, every conflict becomes a matter of survival, and she was the one holding it all together. She had trained these daughters-in-law, she had kept this family united inside the ark for a full year, and now she had to do it again on land. Slowly, painfully, life began to stabilize. Genesis tells us that Noah planted a vineyard, meaning agriculture had taken root again. The animals multiplied and spread. Children were born. Life, fragile, new, but real, began to grow again on the remains of the old world. And here is something that should not be overlooked. When the Bible says that the earth was repopulated through Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, it is also indirectly speaking about her, because every person alive, according to this account, descends from those 3 men, which means every person also carries the legacy of the woman who raised them. If Eve is called the mother of all living before the flood, then Noah's wife becomes the mother of all living after it. Every nation, every culture, every language traces back through her. Everything she taught, how to preserve food, how to care for life, how to live together without destroying one another, how to endure, all of it echoed into future generations. The first children born after the flood had no memory of the old world. Everything they knew came from those 8 people, and at the center of daily life, in the quiet places, in the routines, in the conversations, was her. And that makes the question even more powerful. Why was her name never written down? In the ancient world, history was written through male genealogies, and women's names were preserved only when they played a central role in the narrative. That alone could explain why her name was never recorded. Another explanation points to theological focus. The flood story is built around the covenant between God and Noah. The command, the promise, the relationship, everything is directed through him. His wife is present, essential, and saved, but the spotlight remains on the covenant. But there is a third idea, and it resonates more deeply than the others. What if her anonymity is not a limitation, but a purpose? Because without a name, she becomes anyone. She becomes every woman who stood beside someone, fulfilling a calling, and received no recognition for it. Every mother who raised children in a difficult, broken world. Every wife who carried the unseen weight while someone else stood in the visible role. Every believer who never heard God's voice directly, yet chose to trust anyway. Her silence in Scripture is not erasure. It is an open space, an invitation, a place where anyone who has ever done something important that no one noticed can step in and be seen. But the story has one more chapter, and it complicates everything. In Genesis chapter 9, something deeply uncomfortable happens. After the flood, Noah plants a vineyard, drinks wine, and becomes drunk. He lies exposed in his tent. His son Ham sees him and tells his brothers. Shem and Japheth walk in backward, covering their father without looking at him. And when Noah wakes up and learns what happened, he pronounces a curse, one that echoes through generations. And here is the question almost no one asks. Where was she in that moment? The woman who held everything together in the ark. The woman who endured a year of chaos. The woman who helped rebuild the world from nothing. Where was she when Noah fell? Did she see the warning signs? Did she try to intervene? Was it she who sent the sons to preserve their father's dignity? We don't know. The text is silent, just as it has always been. But one thing stands in sharp contrast. The final image of Noah is of a man who stumbled. But the enduring image of his wife, even without a name, is of a woman who did not. She did not part seas. She did not defeat giants. She did not lead armies or proclaim prophecies. She did something quieter, and in many ways, far more difficult. She believed without hearing the voice of God. She worked without recognition. She endured without breaking. She became the mother of a new world, and no one even wrote down her name. And maybe that is exactly the point. Maybe the Bible left that space empty on purpose, because her story is not about identity, it is about faithfulness. It is about showing up day after day when no one is watching, when no one is applauding, when no one is recording what you do. She did not save humanity with power or spectacle. She saved it with endurance, with her hands, with her quiet, unwavering faith. And when you really think about it, those are the stories that change the world the most. Not the loud ones, but the ones that happen in silence. And her story doesn't end with her. The Bible is filled with women who shaped history while remaining in the shadows. Some remained silent. Others acted with such boldness that their story could not be ignored. And one of those stories comes next. It is the story of a woman who did something almost unthinkable. She took a tent peg and drove it through the temple of her enemy while he slept in her tent. A story that challenges everything you think you know about strength, faith, and courage. And if you've made it this far, then you already understand. This channel goes deeper than most. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. See you there.